Yesterday there was a demonstration in Oxford organised by a coalition of conspiracist, libertarian and openly fascist groups in opposition to the idea of the 15-minute city. For those who don't know, the 15-minute city is the idea of a city in which everyone lives within no more of a 15-minute walk or bike ride from all their basic needs such as food, shops, schools and doctors' surgeries. The idea is to promote a sense of community and reduce dependence on the car. For the conspiracist movement, however, this principle is presented as the first step towards what they call a climate lockdown, in which no one is allowed to leave their designated 15-minute zone. Oxford was chosen as the first venue for a series of demonstrations they are planning because the council here has proposed 6 new traffic filters to reduce congestions and emissions, which the conspiracists claim is the first step towards this climate lockdown, which is in fact, they claim, basically a Jewish plot. A plot by Klaus Schwab of the World Economic Forum to put us all under house arrest. One of the main organisers of the event appears to have been James Harvey, a protege of Tommy Robinson, and the openly white nationalist BNP splinter group Patriotic Alternative was also there in force. There was a counter demonstration called earlier in the day in a different part of the town centre by the SWP front organisation Stand Up to Racism. This drew a couple of hundred people but did not seek to confront or disrupt the fascist-led march and dispersed after an hour or so. This left a small group of around 15 anti-fascists seeking to confront the fascists, who then marched. They then marched over to the main demo where they were blocked by the police, and then after a short time kettled and given dispersal orders under Section 35 of the Antisocial Behaviour, Crime and Policing Act 2014, requiring them to immediately leave the city and not return for 48 hours. I think around 4 of them were arrested for supposedly not complying with these orders, with one of them still in police custody as I speak some 36 hours later. I'd just like to pay tribute at this point to those brave young people who did, against all the odds, choose to actually stand up to the fascists and sacrificed to an extent their freedom, risking a possible criminal record in order to do so. Few of us, I think, will be able to hold our heads high when the history of neo-fascism is written, but they will. The anti-fascists dealt with, the police then escorted the main march to East Oxford, which is the main multi-ethnic working class part of the town. As I was passing through, one man in a MAGA hat on the march was complaining to his friend about the large number of Middle Eastern people on the Cowley Road and said that we should do what Putin did when he bombed 200,000 of them, presumably a reference to the Russian bombing of Syria. This event was arguably a historic moment in that, to my knowledge, this is the first time that openly fascist organisations have been able to march here in East Oxford in numbers effectively unopposed. I would estimate there were at least 2,000 people on the demonstration in total. There was arguably one small victory, which is that, from what I could tell from talking to people, the event did not seem to have gained much local support. Recent traffic reduction measures in Oxford have generated a huge amount of anger due to the basically contemptuous manner in which they were imposed on East Oxford by the then Tory council, with little regard for the impact on the livelihoods of those dependent on driving through the city, such as taxi drivers, carers, handymen, as well as shops and restaurants facing difficulties accessing their customers and suppliers. There was a fear that this predominantly Asian anti-LTN movement would be drawn into the fascist-led demonstration, which would have been a major coup for the fascists, but this does not appear to have happened. Nevertheless, clearly the fact that the fascists were able to mobilize such numbers and march them into the heart of a multi-ethnic working class community like this was a disaster and definitely a historic milestone in the development of the neo-fascist movement. So at this point, I just want to talk about some of the political lessons that we didn't necessarily learn from yesterday's events, as really we should have known them already, but things that were made even clearer, let's say, by yesterday's events. First of all, the state protects the fascists. The police acted quickly and with an iron fist to smash the small counter-demonstration whilst allowing the fascists to march wherever they wanted. If one was being generous to the police, you could say they did this purely to avoid conflict. They wanted to keep the two sides apart by kettling off the smaller contingent, and if the numbers had been reversed, it would have been the fascists who were kettled and shut down. All I can say is I hope we get the chance to put that to the test, but as things stand, the precedent has been set. In fact, When one anti-fascist was questioning why he was being detained by the police, I heard one officer actually say to him, "You have been identified as a member of a left-wing group," as if that was reason enough. And this is even before the Public Order Act has come into force, which will give the police a whole new raft of powers to shut us down. Secondly, this event made absolutely clear, if it was not clear already, that the conspiracist movement that has really taken off since lockdown in 2020 is completely at ease with allying with and even taking leadership from overt and open fascist groups. Given that this conspiracist movement already blames all the fuckeries of the colonial capitalist class on the evil machinations of one Jew, the leader of the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab, this should perhaps come as no surprise. Indeed, it's becoming harder and harder to draw a distinction between the conspiracist movement and the far right, and yesterday made this abundantly clear when they marched shoulder to shoulder with no qualms at all, pushing an increasingly unified libertarian nationalist agenda. At the very least, it is clear that the conspiracists provide space for the fascists to operate and provide cover for their politics and organisation, and are more than happy to do so. Thirdly, and again this is nothing new, but yesterday verified, that the role of the SWP is to actively block and disrupt the potential for anti-fascist militancy. Since the 1970s, the SWP have always divided anti-fascist forces by calling demonstrations in different parts of the city whenever fascists mobilise, in order to draw natural anti-fascists away from confronting the fascists and leaving those who do choose to do so isolated and vulnerable to both the fascists and to police action, which is exactly what happened yesterday. So what are the practical lessons we can draw from yesterday's events? And this is very important because they are planning this growing, I would call it a growing coalition between conspiracists, libertarians and fascists, and they are planning to repeat this demonstration at various other places around the country, with one planned, I have heard, for Cardiff in April, for example. So firstly, I think we need to reacquaint ourselves with the basic anti-fascist organising principle from the 1930s, they shall not pass, no passaran. In hindsight, in my opinion, we should have called a demonstration in East Oxford, with the explicit aim of defending East Oxford from fascists and blocking their passage to Cowley Road once they started heading in that direction. We should have organised this months ago and should have got the unions on board and maximised numbers on the day to actually physically block the path of the fascists. And again, all credit to those young people who are advocating for something along these lines from day one, and I have to make a self-criticism that I did not do enough to make this happen. An alternative, of course, would have been to announce a counter-demonstration on the very same spot that the conspiracist and fascist demo was to take place, but earlier on in the day, and then to have attempted to hold the space. There are obviously pros and cons of each, but what I would certainly not recommend is the SWP strategy of simply organising a counter-demonstration away from anywhere on the route of the main march, which effectively gives the fascists a free pass to go wherever they want. And secondly, I have to say I believe the left does need to be addressing some of the issues that the right are addressing, but address them better. On issues like the LTNs in Oxford, as well as to a certain extent issues of digital surveillance, technologies of social control and so on, the right are exploiting a vacuum where the left has been disoriented and wrong-footed by the state. As my comrade Eric Draitser has said, we need to show how these phenomena are driven by the dynamics of capital accumulation, that is, by the allocation of resources for the maximization of profit. Once we can make clear the real forces at work, we can show how the agenda of the conspiracist, libertarian, fascist right is part of the problem, as it basically advocates a completely deregulated capitalist economy in which all these forces are able to reign unchecked by any democratic mechanisms whatsoever.